Hello my fellow artists and creatives, my name is Michaela and I am your host today. Today's class code is going to be JL331. If you put that in our JerrysArtarama website, that will take you straight to our teacher's cart that has everything we are using tonight. And for tonight we are doing an impressionistic oil painting. The fun part about this is we are also going solvent free for painting and cleanup, so that's going to be super exciting later. To get started, I wanted to go through everything that I'm using. I already have a sketch here on my panel, and I'm using the Senso clear primed linen panel. I also have my Imperial bristle brushes. I only have 3, which I'll go into why I only chose a couple in a little bit. And I also have a single palette knife. Another fun product that we're using tonight is our Schmaltz Impasto Gel Medium. So for impressionistic painting, a lot of times you'll get nice soft texture on top of really thick texture. So I have my oil paints here as well as my schmaltz at the top. Another thing for creating that soft texture is making sure that your oil paints aren't super oily. So a lot of times traditional impressionistic painters will dry out their oils on a paper towel prior, just to make sure that they get that nice smooth texture when they start painting. So I'm actually going to jump right in, and everything I have over here is kind of a fun cleanup for later, so I'll get into that in a little bit. But I'm going to jump in. I have these 3 brushes, and the reason I have 3 brushes that aren't super tiny is because for that impressionistic detail, I don't want super tiny brush strokes and details. I kind of want those thick brush strokes and kind of letting things blend and blur together. So I have my reference photo along with a reference photo from Monet. If you want to check this out, I have one of Monet's paintings that he did, I believe in either Italy or France. Along the border there's this town called Bordighera, and I really liked this picture because it fit with the same kind of like organic tree system as my reference photo here. So I'm mostly using that to kind of look at how he used his brush strokes, how he layered his colors, and I'm going to go straight into this guy. And when I'm not using any solvent, I would typically start off by creating a tone with solvent to tone everything so that whatever peeks through what I put down here isn't a bright white canvas. That is why I kind of went for something that's not white. I really love this natural linen and the color that it has. There are other options as well if you want something that's more of a different tone or mood that already has a different kind of color in the background. So when your oils are dry, you're going to get this really nice, soft, brushy texture. And Impressionism, they really like that simplified, soft, unfinished look. And that texture of the linen is also super nice. You can see that coming through. And I'm not going to do solid color in the background either. I know sometimes, even for myself, I like to just put in a solid color for the background and get it kind of covered. But because I want some of that linen to show through, kind of creating that unfinished look. I'm kind of making sure that I don't cover it too much. This is also a good way to kind of create kind of mystery clouds in the sky. Grabbing between two different colors and mixing them on the canvas, I get some bright blues and some kind of bright whites that creates the illusion of clouds. And I'm kind of curious, put in the chat if you have looked into traditional impressionistic painting before, and if you have done it. Which artists you've looked at, because there are quite a few really impressive impressionistic painters out there. So I'm just filling in my sky, blending my colors on here, and I chose a kind of small color palette. The smaller the color palette, the more kind of cohesive your mixtures kind of look on the panel. And I'm already kind of getting this really cool kind of glowing effect when I add the sky in between my branches. And I don't know if I mentioned this already, but this is completely solvent free. With the impressionistic painting, it kind of helps that the paint is typically kind of on the drier side, so that solvent isn't really needed. Alright, as I'm filling this in, I am continuing to look back and forth between my reference photo and this Monet painting, making sure I'm kind of mimicking these soft, brushy textures in the background, popping them in between my branches. Yes, we have a question.
What is schmaltz and how exactly do you use it?
So schmaltz is a oil medium. It's kind of like a jelly consistency. It is mixed into your paint to kind of make it thicker, make the paint extend a little bit longer. It can also sometimes make your paint dry a little bit faster. I always like to add that into my paints near the end so I can have those thick brush strokes and impasto marks on top of my softness that I lay down first. And typically I'll just take a small amount of the schmaltz and my oil paint, mix them together until they're perfectly combined, and then pop that right on top. Has anyone used schmaltz before? Kind of curious. I know I hadn't heard of the schmaltz until I came here, and I actually really love working with it. Another question?
Well, to clarify, so is schmaltz kind of the opposite of a solvent?
Schmaltz is a medium. I guess kind of, where solvent kind of breaks down the color and schmaltz kind of packs it all together. holds it together, creates body. So I guess in a way, kind of. All right. And again, I want to go for an unfinished look when it comes to Impressionistic painting. So I'm actually going to call this sky pretty much done. I'm going to make sure I get those little peekaboo areas. Especially in here. All right, and this is my smallest brush that I was using. I like to make sure, especially with these wide open areas, to help create that texture, using that smaller brush is going to make sure that you have that texture showing up. I am going to move to my largest brush, which is that flat 6. And I have 3 different types of brushes as well. So I have my largest brush is a flat 6. My smallest was a 4 bright. And I also have a size 2 fan. And the fan is kind of fun for adding those really unique brush strokes. But I'm going to go into my ground. And the biggest thing when it comes to Impressionistic painting is light. So a lot of times they would create the idea of something, but making sure that that light is like the focal point of what they're working on. I don't remember if it was Monet, but I've heard stories of Impressionistic painters starting a painting outside, and then as the day went on, they're like, oh man, this is a completely different scene now that the sun has changed and the shadows have shifted. So they would grab a whole new canvas and start a whole new painting, just so that they can create a different mood with the different lighting that they are getting. And again, I'm just brushing this in. I like that softness that we're getting, and I like mixing those colors on the canvas, so I'm going to go for some blue next. Do we have another color? Or question?
Yes. I don't color. Mari wants to know, is there a reason why you painted in the background first?
I just like getting those big open areas kind of filled in just for myself. I really like focusing on details, and it's so much easier to layer details on top of something that's already kind of built up. I know a lot of the Impressionistic painters that I've looked into will start with those tiny details. Like they'll jump straight into the shadows in the tree, or they'll jump straight into the highlights on the grass. It really depends on who's painting. I know I like to just start with whatever interests me the most. So that sky was what was kind of drawing me in, so I started with that. But again, it's kind of depends on who's painting. And again, I'm just mixing this blue and yellow together on the canvas. The more variation of color you get, the better, especially when you have a limited palette like this. And I am going to go into these shadows underneath the tree while I'm down here. And the size of the brush, I'm going kind of big because I don't want to get too bogged down in the details. So it's kind of good to go your smaller brushes on your big wide areas and bigger brushes on your tinier areas, just so that you don't get bogged down in tiny details and you can create texture on those wide open spaces. And then to darken it up even more, I have this really nice quinacridone garnet color. I'm going to go in and mix that in with my blue to get a nice purple. that's what I'm going to be using for my super dark sections. And I should probably go through all the fun colors that I'm using today, because Charbon oils have so many color options. They are a French brand, and they are used typically for plein air painting and paintings such as these. So these are a absolutely perfect oil paint for this project. I have light linen for my light blue. I have this French blue, quinacridone garnet, deep French yellow, Naples yellow, and titanium white. And all the other colors that I'm going to end up getting on here is just going to be a fun mixture, optically mixed on the canvas here. I'm going to go in to that deep French yellow, get some more variation in my grass here. And another thing that Impressionistic painters do is they work fast. They lay down random brush strokes. If you put something down that doesn't really fit well color-wise, or even like something that you're not a fan of, that's okay. It's better to keep layering and layering these soft colors so that you get more and more variation in those tiny little details. So now that I've laid down that kind of ochre color that I ended up getting with my brush, I'm going to go in back with that Naples yellow, kind of tone things down, and then you're still going to get the color you're aiming for, which I'm aiming for that really nice bright green, while still having some variation in the grass as well. And again, I'm kind of working quickly, making sure I'm not getting too focused on any details. And I do want to create kind of like a glowing horizon. So I'm going to go back into my Naples yellow and brighten it up with some of that white. And another thing, I'm not going to be cleaning my brushes at all during this painting. And that is because I want the most variation of color as possible. So if I get a funky color based on what I have on my brush, I'm going to be okay with it. So I'm going in, I still have just the teensiest bit of blue in my brush. So when I add this really nice light yellow with that Naples yellow and white, I'm going to get a slight greenish color, which is going to be perfect for the grass we have down here. And for that glowing horizon, I'm going to add that super bright yellow in the grass. But then I'm also going to go in with just straight white and brighten up that bottom part of my sky to really get that nice bright horizon color. So I'm just going to take off most of this color on my palette, go straight into that white, and highlight my sky. And this could be where I start mixing in schmaltz to get a thick line of that white along the sky. But I'm going to hold off on the schmaltz just for a little bit longer until I have more of my tree kind of blocked in.
How do you avoid turning your colors into mud when you're not exactly cleaning off your brushes?
You can use a rag, so I actually have a rag here. You can wipe off a majority of the color, especially if you're going from like super dark blues and jumping into like a yellow. I'll mostly just take a majority of it off with my rag Another thing is, I was gonna wait a little bit for this part, but it's super exciting. So solvent-free cleanup, I have linseed oil instead, as well as this Soho butcher tray. If you prop it up at an angle with whatever you have to kind of prop it up, fill just a little bit of linseed oil at the base here. If you prop your brushes in the oil, you can let it sit overnight, or you can just dip it in there, wipe it off on the rag, and keep going. If you leave this in here overnight, the pigment will settle to the base of this oil. You can just take it out, wipe it off, clean it in the sink with some brush cleaner, and you'll have perfectly clean brushes. Now you don't have to use linseed oil. This is going to be the fastest drying of all of these slow drying oils. You can use walnut oil, something else that I think safflower oil dries pretty slow. I wanted to use linseed oil because I wanted to see how long it would take to dry. I actually had this tray here for about a month, and it's still, I don't see any sign of drying. So you can keep this to clean your brushes for quite a while. And I'm gonna go into my tree now, I think. I'm gonna start with this deep French yellow and get my bright spots. Again, not focusing too much on shape, more so light and they would say feeling, the impression of what you're seeing. A lot of times Impressionists are doing plein air painting, so the feeling that they're feeling in the moment when they're looking at what they're painting, that's what they're trying to capture. Yes, another question?
So Stephanie said she's always been afraid to try oil painting because she heard that it has very strong, unpleasant odors.
Mm-hmm.
With the process that you're doing now, are there any smells? Is it really toxic as far as the fumes?
I would definitely say it's better when I'm not using solvent. Right now, I personally smell a little bit of the oil paint smell, but other than that, I don't smell anything super toxic. Do you guys smell anything super?
No.
Okay, so it's
Just oils.
Yeah,
Just
it's
oil.
really not that bad. It's just the oil paints. You don't have those solvent smells. You just have the oil, which doesn't really give off much of a smell. So if that's your biggest worry, I would definitely try out this trick, solvent free, and see if that changes your mind at all. I'm still going in, adding those bright spots that I'm finding. Alright. And I'm not going to keep this color. I do want some of this to pop through. But like I said, I'm going to kind of mix the majority of my colors on the panel here. So now that I have that really nice deep French yellow, I'm going to go in with some of my French blue. Very French today. And I'm going to go into those dark areas, and since I have some of that yellow on my brush still, I should be getting a little bit of a greenish, which is perfect. And then as I'm kind of painting this blue next to my yellow here, beautiful greens. I'm also painting around my branches, which I haven't put in quite yet, but I am adding some of these leaf clusters overlapping my branches, so I'd rather get those in beforehand than afterward.
You may have answered this earlier, but I was probably typing. What draws you to Impressionism over realism for this specific painting?
For this specific painting?
And in general, I guess. You can answer both if you want.
Well, I really like working quickly, and I like kind of capturing realism, but kind of letting it, like, color take over, if that makes sense. Color and texture are what I'm really drawn to. And I've always been intrigued by Impressionistic oil painters. For this one in particular, I knew I wanted to do Impressionism before I chose my photo. I actually chose my photo after finding some Monet references. I knew they liked capturing like that light, so I made sure that I had a really nice light in this picture. And those kind of organically twisting branches are always super fun.
I really like what's happening with the shadow under the tree right now.
Isn't that fun?
Yeah, I really like the color.
I'll probably go in there later and deepen up some of that color. And this French blue is, I don't know if this is the exact pigment, but this dark blue is what a lot of Impressionistic painters will use for their shadows. And some of the ones I've looked into before today, this is what they would start with, is this deep blue to block in those shadows first, and then do everything after that. Alright. I'm now going to go in with my 4 Bright and block in some of those trunks and branches. So I just wiped it off on my rag, that light blue. I don't want too much white in this. I want to start kind of dark. So I'm going to go in with that French blue. And I'm going to create different kinds of brush strokes in my branches than I have in my leaves, just so that you can create some type of differentiation between the two, especially since I'm using similar colors. And I am going to mix this with that quinacridone garnet color. That's also going to separate it from my leaves. Go in with that garnet. Again, this was my super dark color I was kind of planning beforehand. And now that I have that blue and deep red already in here, I can go in with just straight white, and where I see that highlight, block that in, and it will just mix with what I have on there already. Again, trying not to get too focused on those details. Another thing, I want to make sure that this color is kind of going other places. So I might look for the teeniest details I can find in my reference photo. So I actually have, right here in the grass, I have tiny little sticks. I don't know if you can see those tiny little sticks. I'm going to kind of use those to kind of move this nice purple color throughout my painting. So even though they're not really, they don't really stand out, I'm still going to kind of put that in there. And I'm going to use my palette knife because those are tiny details. And pop those in down here. Those simple marks are kind of feel big, if that makes any sense. Alright, I'm gonna, yes, one more color, or question?
It happens to do with color. Can you remind us again what the blue is called?
I have two blues. I have a light linen and a French blue.
And the light linen is the lighter one, and the French blue is like that dark.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yep, that deep navy, and that light linen is that baby blue color.
So pretty.
I know, I love that color.
You talked about making your super dark color. Did you do any color tests before to see how dark you could get your colors?
I did a little bit. So I did this painting already twice. So I started out with a very similar color palette, and I wasn't really happy with the first color palette I chose, so I kind of tweaked it a little bit. And I actually have, this was my other one that I did. This is on the other type of panel I mentioned that's pre-toned. This is our Pro Tone Creative Mark panel. And this was already a really nice light green color. I don't know if you guys can see, but like this color that's poking through in here, this light green, that's the color it started out as. It's gonna give it like a different type of feeling. And this one is already, I'm trying to be a little bit softer than I was on that one, trying to get a different feel. So I'm kind of excited to see how much they differ afterwards. And I'm just filling in those open spaces with a combination of that Naples yellow, or no, I was using the deep French yellow in that light linen. Just to kind of fill in those open spaces, because I'm going to move on to my schmaltz before we run out of time. So again, I am laying down the soft colors first, and then I'm going to go in with those punchy colors, and not punchy colors, but more, I don't know what it is with color today. That word is just like sticking on my tongue. Those punchy brush strokes to kind of create that impasto feel. And let me finish those branches as well.
Your mom says hi.
Hi, Mom. I think my mom is in Portugal right now. I was gonna say. She's not even in the US. She's a diehard fan. Alright. Now that I got all these branches and soft colors in here, I'm gonna start messing around my schmaltz. I also, before I do that, I have this really nice moss kind of hanging off the edge of my tree here. I feel like this is the perfect area for that quinacridone garnet. Just pop that in there. Oh, that nice purple with the French blue. I love that. Okay, so I'm gonna go in now with my schmaltz. And I'm doing more paint than schmaltz. I don't want to do too much schmaltz. And since I'm not really mixing with these punchy, thick impasto marks, I'm gonna mix it on here. And I'm gonna mix a few different variations of a green. So I'm just kind of grabbing in between my blues, my yellows, and my schmaltz. Give me some options to choose from when I start putting these on here. So I got a nice light pale green, I got a nice dark green. I might mix these two together so I get something in between. This is a little blue, so I'm going to add some of that Naples yellow. Alright. Now you can use your palette knife for this. I like to use my brushes, but I'll show you with my palette knife quick. I think the brush goes by a little bit faster and it creates kind of more of a soft, fluffy texture than a sharp dot or a mark. But definitely playing around with texture and thickness is a big thing when it comes to Impressionism. So I'm going to go back in with my schmaltzified colors and pop those in, starting with my highlights again. Now this is very close to my sky color, so I'm either going to have to adjust this light green or my sky color. I think I'm going to actually adjust my sky color. But I'm going to pop these in, again making sure I don't focus on one area for too long. And I like to, especially when I add schmaltz to my paint, scooping it up, especially when I'm using a brush, so that I can leave nice thick areas of that impasto mark making. Making sure I'm looking at my reference photo as I go. Twisting your brush as well, especially when you're focusing on mark making, so that all of your, every time you lay down some of that color, it's not the same shape that you're getting. Alright. And don't be afraid to let your colors mix. I'm getting some of that dark green mixing in with my lighter green. I'm also going to add some more yellow, I think, in here because I'm feeling very blue. Not sad, but just blue. Alright, get some more dark green up here. And since it is super blue, I might just mix schmaltz into my yellows and just mix it that way. And if you don't have a reference photo for whatever reason and you're just kind of making this type of tree up from life or from your mind, kind of create little blobby leaf sections, and the top of that blobby leaf section is going to be light and the bottom of that blobby leaf section is going to be dark. So like this little blobby leaf section that I have here, I have light at the top, dark at the bottom, and it should create that illusion of your leaf blob.
Technical term.
Yes, that is a technical term.
Term of the day.
schmaltified. Alright. Now I'm going to go in with that schmaltified yellow. I go for deep French yellow. Grab some of my schmaltz. And it doesn't really change the pigment or the color at all. Especially if you're keeping it less than a 50-50 ratio of your schmaltz. And I'm actually going to go in with my fan brush now. Get some different brush strokes and texture on there. Making sure I twist it so I'm not getting the same look.
Nola said that she sometimes struggles with Impressionism and that she will start off well and then she'll end up moving into realism before she even realizes it. Is there any tip you have to avoid that shift into realism?
Yes. I sometimes have the same issue, which is why the big brushes is definitely going to help you. Using big brushes is going to prohibit you from making those tiny, realistic details. And if you want to really kind of push yourself, the bigger the brush, the more like separated from reality that you're going to get. What's another trick? Fast. Painting really fast. Give yourself a time to kind of work within. If you paint faster, you're going to kind of break away from those realistic details as well. Especially if you give yourself a specific time limit, and once that time limit is done, you stop. Even if you're not completely done, if you stop, look at it, wait, put it in the corner, pull it out later, that's also going to help you quite a bit.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm just adding in more of that yellow. That yellow next to those blues is going to create like an optical green. And I actually have these little sections up here that are kind of funky looking. I'm going to add those. So if you're worried about kind of avoiding details, like there's some things, like tiny things in there that you're like, I can't not have this, you can still put it in there, but simplify it as much as you can into like 1 or 2 brush strokes. And I'm actually going to make sure I add my little man before I run out of time. I'm going to mix that purple since it's such a small little area. And again, this is what I was talking about, those tiny details, simplifying it down to as few brush strokes as possible. I'm going to kind of look at my little man and kind of break him down into as few parts as possible, so that that torso, I can use the width of my brush to kind of just brush across a tiny little rectangle, use the corner of my brush to dot a little head, and then use that corner again to create those 2 little legs. So breaking it down as much as possible, using a big brush for something so tiny is also going to help you simplify that down. So that brush, head, leg, leg. Tap in anything else that might be needed. And then I'm going to darken up my shadows. Do you have any other questions?
Carol on Facebook said they really love where this painting is going and was hoping we consider doing this image in watercolor at some point.
Ooh, definitely. I've heard quite a few good things about the reference photo I've chosen, even before your lovely comments. This is honestly a super cool photo. It was on Unsplash. If you guys haven't heard of Unsplash, I know my moderators today, Amanda and Emmy, have access to those. So if you want to check those out. Going back into my grass down here, getting a little bit more variation. I'm going to brighten up some yellows down there, and again I was going to change the color of my sky just a little bit to kind of bring that out. Actually I have my schmaltzified yellow over here. I'm going to pop that in over here.
Ariana said that she's been told not to use pure white until the end, but your painting is working well even using it in the beginning. Do you know the difference in those approaches?
Not off the top of my head. Let me think. I mean, I'm mixing my colors on the panel. So anytime I want to lighten things up, if I have white on there already, that kind of helps when I'm mixing it on there. I know there's a specific medium that focuses on that rule, but I honestly can't remember off the top of my head. But I will do some research and get back to you for sure. All right. I'm getting pretty close to what I'm going to call done. Going to change up my sky a little bit. I'm going to go just a little bit more blue. So I'm just going to mix my light linen and French blue together. And mostly in just areas where I feel like I need a little bit more what's the word?
Contrast.
Contrast, thank you.
That's what I thought, but I didn't want to say the wrong one.
Just a little more contrast, especially with that light green I had in there. And typically, sky has a darker blue near the top of the sky, and near the horizon it gets a little bit lighter. So I'm going to focus this near the top of my sky as much as possible, just so I can get kind of a naturalistic light feel. And another thing that's kind of cool when you adjust your colors as you're painting is you can get a nice halo around where you were adding your subject matter. So like where I'm bringing that close up to the tree, there's still going to be some of that other color kind of peeking through along the edge. I know some people like to avoid that, some people like to add that in. I kind of like it. So I'm okay with it.
How did you choose the colors that you decided to work with?
I always like to choose colors that called me.
Cool.
It's calling my name. But I also like to make sure I am still within like color mixing range, so making sure I have some type of yellow, some type of blue, some type of red, so that even if I pick crazy colors, I'm still able to mix other colors with what I've chosen. Alright. And I knew as well with that question that I wanted green, but I didn't want straight green, which is why I have 2 different blues and 2 different yellows.
Someone earlier was asking what green you were using, and I was like, actually, not one.
None. None of the greens. No greens. Alright. Okay, so I'm actually going to not call this done. I was going to say, I'm going to call this done. The last time I did this with this other panel I had here, I had lots of blues, lots of yellows, but I really loved that red color, that quinacridone garnet, and it's such a nice contrast to any green that you have in there. So I want to make sure I add some of that red into this painting. I'm actually going to schmaltzify it. I'm going to use that all the time now. So grab a nice scoop of that quinacridone garnet, nice little scoop of my schmaltz. Mix those together, and I'm going to pop this into my shadow areas. This is another thing I noticed actually in this reference photo here, one of Monet's paintings, is he uses that nice deep kind of reddish color to create those shadows in his green areas because it's a contrasting color. So I'm going to pop some of that in there, and then I'm going to call it done. Since I think we're getting close to the end today already.
It goes fast.
It does. It's wild. And since I'm not going to use too much of this red, I am tapping it in with my little handy dandy palette knife. And I'm kind of focusing it on where I have my dark greens so that it can kind of vibrate next to it. And that should kind of deepen those shadow areas. And typically, if you're having a contrasting color like this, I would typically do this first and then put that green on top, just so that the green is more prominent. But Impressionism does focus a lot on color, so allowing this to kind of stand out fits with this type of painting. Add those final touches. Up close it looks like, I was going to say a cranberry tree. Do cranberries grow on trees? No. No? Okay. Well, this is my cranberry tree. If cranberry trees existed, this would be it.
It exists now.
It does. Right here on my panel. Or a pomegranate tree. Do pomegranates grow on trees?
Bush.
What was that?
It's a bush.
It's a bush. They grow on bushes?
Kind of. It's a sticky bush.
Sticky
Before
bush?
we end,
Yes.
someone requested if you
Yeah.
could, like not at this exact moment, just before then,
Yeah.
if you could hold it up so that we could see a little more of the texture.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And then also, how long does the schmaltz take to fully dry? I can't say it without trying to do it.
Schmaltz.
A northern accent.
It depends first on how much you're using. I feel like when I did this guy up here, it dried just about at the same rate as my other colors, if not a smidgen faster. But it's not too different to normal oil paint. Because it still has a majority of oil paint in the mixture with the schmaltz. Alright. I'm just going in with just a little bit of some more highlight. Mostly because I'm looking at my other painting. I really like those bright highlights on my tree. So I'm just adding a little bit more contrast. Alright. But I will do that right now. The close-up shot as I stick my hand in paint. So here's up close.
I love how the texture of the panel comes through too.
Right, that's my favorite part, especially with this linen.
Side,
yeah.
So you can really see. Yeah, you go on the sideways, you can really see. Yeah.
Look at those thick marks. Schmaltzified.
There is Mott in the chat.
Mott! We miss you. Your name is on the table still. Alright. I'm just going to add a couple more highlights and then we're going to finish up. Are there any final comments, questions?
You are going to go over the solvent-free cleaning of the brushes at the end, yes?
Yes.
Perfect.
Which I will do now. I know I kind of brushed over it earlier, but I'm just going to basically let them clean themselves overnight. So scrape off a majority of your paint on your palette, wipe it off on a rag so you don't have too much excess paint on there, and I'm just going to set them in my oil. The reason it is inclined like this is so that you're not using a bunch of oil, and your handles and your furlet, whatever it's called. Ferrule. Thank you. Furlet. Your ferrule is not soaked in oil. So I don't know if you guys can see this super well, but I have oil at the base of this. Of this guy here. Propped up at an angle. Letting those bristles soak. Again, I'm just going to wipe it off on a rag, a majority of that paint. Let those bristles soak. And I've already used this once, which is why it has that kind of greenish color. It already has pigment that's kind of fallen to the bottom of the oil. But you'll really just let this sit here overnight. And in the morning, all that pigment is going to fall to the bottom of the oil. You'll wipe off that excess oil, clean it like you usually would with brush cleaner in the sink, and then they're all set. Now, you can use this, like I said, for quite a while. If you use different oils, it could last longer. Again, I was just kind of seeing how linseed oil would react. Works perfectly. Disposing of the linseed oil after you no longer want to use it, make sure you are using one of those safety fire rag containers or taking it out immediately. Just be making sure that you're using safety precautions when you're working with your oils. But that is just about everything for today. Thank you guys for coming. Don't forget, today's class code is JL331. Make sure you look up our teacher's cart if you want anything that I was using here tonight. Also, if you want to post on our Jerry's Live Facebook group, we have one security question. If you do not answer that, you are deemed a robot. And then next week, I will be here again. We are going to have Ruben Negron on. He is going to be showing us the versatility of gouache. Super excited about that. But that's all. I will see you all next week. Thank you guys for coming. Bye.